Hello, welcome to the Paranormal Peep Show with myself, Neil Geddes-Ward, and fellow presenter Andrew Chaplin. Hello Andy, how are you today?
Yeah, not bad, Neil. Finally, we've got some good weather in England.
I know, absolutely. It's been like Arctic conditions this past week and a half, and everyone's been putting their coats back on and their jumpers and everything like that. And I've even seen people with scarves and things, and I kept thinking, are we back in February? So suddenly, the sun has come out, and I'm feeling all hot, and it's really weird. I don't know if that's climate change or just dodgy weather.
Well, it's funny you should mention climate change, because weren't we told by the scientists of the whole climate change thing that with global warming, all the water would evaporate, go into the atmosphere, and then England would be absolutely soggy and wet for a longer period? This is the driest April on record.
Yeah, we're actually in May, by the way.
Well, but this year's April has been the driest April on record.
Yes.
And we are in May, and we've still not had any rain. So,
but there are parts of the UK that get torrential downpours all the year through. And one of those counties I've actually stayed and spent a lot of time there is Devon, actually. And our guests that are talking to us tonight are actually on the line from Devon. So we can actually ask them, is Devon rainy at the moment? So can I welcome tonight's guests, Richard Freeman and Jackie Tonks, who are both cryptozoologists. And I'm sure they can explain that to our listeners, because it's a very big word and I only learnt it this week. Hello, Richard, and hello, Jackie. Welcome to the Paranormal Peep Show. We're fine, thank you. So first of all, let's just clear up the matter. Has it been raining at all in Devon?
Not today.
It's been nice.
Lovely stuff. Lovely stuff. But is it traditionally known as, it's always called the rainy county, is that right?
I think Cumbria is actually supposed to be the most rainy county. And yeah, I mean, it can do, but yeah, Dartmoor is very rainy, but other bits aren't too bad. Yeah.
Right, because my auntie used to have a camping site in Devon, and I stayed there, and literally the whole week we stayed there, it poured with rain. It always seems to be, as soon as you want to go camping, the rain gods come out and just cast evil spells on you that week, don't they? It's but there we go. Anyway, so anyway, welcome to the Paranormal Show with Andrew and myself. Now, we talk to all sorts of different people, ranging from people that are into ghost hunting and fairies and UFOs and that kind of thing. Now, you've got a slightly different angle tonight on the Paranormal Peep Show. You're coming in with a kind of creatures, mythical creatures, maybe real creatures, and you're trying to maybe prove their existence. I mean, can you give some backgrounds about yourselves? You know, don't mind who goes first, but maybe ladies first. Jackie, if you want to go first and tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I think I was first influenced by Arthur C. Clarke, Mysterious World programs in the 70s and early 80s. I remember seeing the iconic Patterson and Gimlin film with Bigfoot, and I think that got me interested, but I didn't sort of really get into it until a really rather paranormal in itself strange encounter with Richard, which was 10:20 on a Saturday evening one night.
Is he one of the cryptozoological creatures that you were investigating?
Yeah, well, he almost was, actually, yeah. I was reading the Fortean Times magazine, which I don't know whether people know is a magazine all about cryptozoology and paranormal phenomena. And I just got to the end of an article on the Mongolian Death Worm. And I looked at the photo of the guy in the end. I thought, oh, he looks a bit hard, you know. Anyway, Richard's laughing here. I thought, better walk my dog. So I walked to the end of my street, which is right near St David's Station in Exeter, across the road. And suddenly, the guy whose picture I'd just looked at walked past me. And I did this double take, and I said, excuse me, are you Richard? And he spun round and looked at me a bit cautiously, because it was quite late at night. I said, yes, I am. And I said, do you write for the Fortean Times? He goes, yes, I do. I said, oh my God, I've just seen your photograph I've just been reading your article in the house. So that in itself was very, very spooky. Because this is a national magazine as well. And the guy just happened to be at the bottom of my street, which is surreal in itself. So.
And you didn't know where he lived or anything about him?
No. Really, really bizarre, real synchronicities.
So you kind of got off the stalking charge, I guess, based upon the evidence you could present. And normally it's guys that chase ladies down the street, so this is a bit of a reverse on that one. But we are in the paranormal world, so anything goes.
But I sort of bumped into him a couple of months later in W.H. Smith, and he said there was the Weird Weekend Conference, which is the conference for the Centre for Fortean Zoology. So I went along to that, and after I've been hooked, and I got invited out on an expedition with Adam Davies, who's you often see on sort of did the Russian Bigfoot program, and has recently appeared on other programs, and then I got seriously hooked, especially into the Bigfoot side of things.
Wow. And so how long have you been doing this serious investigation side of things, Jackie?
I think it was about 2002. Went on the expedition with Adam Davies and Andrew Sanderson, who owned this like a production sort of expedition company called Extreme Expeditions. And a load of us went sort of, as friends really more than anything, and interested people. And that seriously got me hooked. I did not think Bigfoot existed. I went along because I thought I'd see a bear. I wanted to see a bear in the wild or a cougar. And I seriously did not think there was any chance that Bigfoot could exist in America. It's sort of with so many people around. I thought, no way. But by the time I got back, I was 97% convinced it existed. And then the second trip, which I'll probably tell you about later, I actually saw it, which is a very freaky experience. So.
Oh, wow. We look forward to hearing that. Okay, so thank you for that, Jackie. So, Richard, you've also got your side of the story where you meet people that just accost you in the street saying, I've read about you in a magazine. It sounds like you have a bit of a paranormal life going on quite a lot there. So can you tell us a bit about your background and how you got into this whole cryptozoology kind of thing?
I can answer that in 2 words. Doctor Who.
Ah, yes.
I grew up in the 1970s with the great and sorely missed John Pertwee as the Doctor, and he'd been trapped on Earth by the Time Lords, who changed the dematerialization codes on the TARDIS. So all his adventures were on Earth. So they were all the more frightening and compelling. So you had things like giant poisonous maggots crawling out of slag heaps in Wales, and you had intelligent super evolved marine dinosaurs coming up out of the sea, and disembodied alien intelligences that animate plastic, and then have grown bodies that look like these huge Lovecraftian tentacled monsters in doll factories, and all these bizarre weird things. There's so much menace and weirdness in Doctor Who that you just don't get in other series like Star Trek or anything like that. Doctor Who is far, far better, far more frightening, far weirder, and far more. It's more horror really than science fiction when you analyse it. And that's what fascinated me with monsters and strange creatures. Then when I left school, I became a zookeeper for many years. I was at Twycross Zoo, where the PG Tips chimps came from, if you can remember those.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I was there, and I ran the reptile house. I looked after crocodiles, alligators, snakes, lizards, and things. And then I went away to university to study zoology. And whilst I was on holiday from university on Bodmin Moor, I was out on Bodmin Moor looking for the beast of Bodmin Moor. One day I slipped into the sadly now defunct Potter's Museum of Curiosities, which was this museum where they had strange dioramas. They were all stuffed by this eccentric man called Walter Potter, and he stuffed squirrels having jewels, and kittens getting married, and frogs at school, and guinea pigs playing cricket. And he also collected bizarre heterogeneous things, like he would have a Maori axe next to them, a model of a church made entirely out of bird feathers, next to the head of a man-eating crocodile from India. And it's a fantastic museum. Sadly, it was broken up and sold off a few years ago. But whilst I was there, I came across this little magazine in the foyer called Animals and Men, and I picked it up to have a look at, and it wasn't as rude as it sounded. And it was all about cryptozoology, and it was edited by this guy called John Downes, who's the head of this outfit called the Centre for Fortean Zoology, which hadn't long been in existence. I started writing to them. I became the Yorkshire rep. at the time. And then when I finished at university, I came down and joined the CFZ full time, and the rest, as they say, is history. Since then, I've been all around the world on every continent except Antarctica, hunting creatures like the Tasmanian wolf, the Mongolian death worm, the yeti, the almasty, the orang pendek, the giant anaconda, and many, many more.
Wow, that's a bit of a long list of strange creatures that I've never heard of, apart from one or two. Andy, have you ever heard of any of these creatures from that list?
Funnily enough, the Mongolian Death Worm I've heard of, but perhaps you can explain what that is and what the story is behind it.
Well, the Mongolian Death Worm first came to the attention of the West. In Mongolia, it goes back centuries. It first came to the attention of the West in the early part of the 20th century, mainly through a guy called Professor Roy Chapman Andrews, who's a paleontologist. Apparently, he was the model for Indiana Jones. He was an American paleontologist who went out into the Gobi Desert looking for the remains of early man. And what he found instead was lots and lots of fossilized dinosaur eggs, and that's what he became famous for. But the Mongolian Prime Minister had asked him to look out for what they call the Alroy hoi hoi, which translates as the intestine worm, which is a creature, they say, looks like a great length of cow's intestine, hence the name, and it crawls up to the surface during the hotter months. And the nomads go in great terror of it. According to Roy Chapman Andrews, they believed it could spit a corrosive yellow saliva that acted like venom. Sorry, it acted like acid and seared through flesh. And it could also produce great blasts of electricity like an electric eel. And there was stories of camels that had trodden on one of these things and then convulsed and fell over dead. And there's one story about a geologist sticking a theodolite into a sand dune, and then he starts foaming at the mouth and thrashing about and falls down dead. And his colleagues see this red worm-like creature slithering off into the sand. That was the story. And since then, several other cryptozoologists have gone over to the Mongolian desert, the Gobi, to search for this thing. And the area, when it was under socialist rule, was more or less closed. But in the 90s, it opened up. And a Czech cryptozoologist called Ivan Merkley, who's sadly now dead, went on a couple of expeditions over there. And my colleague Adam Davis went as well. So I thought, it's always something that's fascinated me. So I went over there and I travelled for 1,000 miles through the desert. And it's the most bizarre place you've ever seen. Some of it looks like traditional sandy desert. Other parts look like giant cat litter trays stretching off into infinity. There's one area where there's all chips of mica, so it's all shiny and reflective. They call it the mirror. Other parts look like Mordor from Lord of the Rings. Other parts look like the surface of the moon or the surface of Mars, all red. A wonderful, alien, strange place. And I talked to many, many people who'd seen the death worm, some within the last 12 months, and an old guy who'd seen it in the 1930s when he was a boy, and people are petrified of it. They grow in very great terror, and they describe an animal that's sort of sausage or salami-shaped, scaly, sort of a brick red colour. Hard to tell the head from the tail, blunt at both ends. Most people just saw it lying in the sand, and one guy told me he saw it as a kid when he was tending the family's camels and goats. He told his parents, and they packed up the gur, the circular tent that the nomads had, got all their livestock and went out of the area. They were so terrified. And the nomads say that the electricity, they call it throwing lightning, that's folklore. They don't actually believe it does that. But they say it can spit this terrible burning venom, and they are absolutely petrified of it.
Has anyone got any sort of videos or photographs of this creature?
No. I made a documentary called Lair of the Red Worm, and if you go onto YouTube and type in Lair of the Red Worm, you'll get it. I talked to an awful lot of witnesses, but we didn't see the creature itself. I don't think it is a worm. I think it's a reptile. I think it's a worm lizard. There are a group of reptiles called amphisbaenas, or worm lizards. They're not true snakes. They're not true lizards. They're a little side group of their own, and they're strange sausage-shaped burrowing limbless reptiles, and I think this is a large undiscovered species of amphisbaena or worm lizard, and that is what the Mongolian death worm is, in my opinion. And I'd love to go back and have another crack at it.
So it sounds like a slow worm with attitude or something.
Yeah, they're not that closely related to slow worms. They have a superficial resemblance, but they're a different group. They're a sort of sister group. Slow worms are legless lizards. These things are not true lizards, but they're related.
And how big are they, roughly, if people describe them?
Generally about 2 feet long. Some descriptions were bigger, up to about 5 feet, but about as thick as your arm. Rather like a draft excluder. So we're not talking about the huge things like they were in Dune or Tremors. People get that idea into their head, but they're not. They're quite small, but they generate an awful lot of fear.
And in terms of like its name, the Death Worm, like what's its main way of allegedly killing either people or animals or whatever?
Spitting this searing venom at them.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And electrifying them as well. And it was interesting, Pat Spain had that Cryptozoology series, and they were showing that animals that move very fast across sand generate static electricity. And there was a case of a Russian guy who threw, I think, petrol over one because he wanted to kill it, because his guide went hysterical when he saw it. And he threw petrol and it just blew up in his face. So, you know, it probably was generating static, so that could be part of the explanation for that.
Do other, has there been cases of snakes or reptiles that have generated static as well?
Not really, no.
Yeah, I don't know. This was the first thing on the Pat Spain programme. It'd be interesting to sort of test it out.
There are certain types of cobra that can spit venom.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Is it the king cobra, I think, or
no, the king cobra. King cobra doesn't spit venom. King cobra isn't actually a true cobra at all.
Oh, isn't it? Oh, right.
No, it's called a king cobra, but it's not a true cobra. No, there are certain types of cobra, the spitting cobras that spit. They can bite as well, but they also spit their venom.
Interesting. I was having a conversation with my girlfriend the other day for some reason about spitting. What was it now? Saliva, and apparently she like a cobra or something like a snake. Some people sort of accidentally spit their saliva out like snakes, and it's just a phenomenon. I don't know if it's just only women, but maybe blokes do as well.
Roy Hattersley.
I think Roy Hattersley was probably the main culprit on that got that ball rolling. But she's done it a couple of times, so I thought, all right, fine.
Well, Princess Diana referred to the royal family as lizards, so you know Absolutely. The whole David Icke reptilian thing comes in here. Cryptozoologists
should pay a visit to Buckingham Palace. They, travelling around the world and actually on their doorstep. So Jackie, you've ventured around the world with Richard on these kind of trips sometimes?
I've never been with Richard yet. We're going, the first trip we're going to go on is Russia in July to the Caucasus Mountains looking for the Almas, which is the Russian Yeti. It's not like the Himalayan Yeti, which is rather large. And that's more like an ape. We think, but this one is possibly an offshoot of Homo erectus. Seems to be, Richard will explain, it seems to be a lot more advanced.
The Almasti is bigger than a modern man, but not as massive as the true Yeti of Tibet and the Himalayas. It has a thick brow ridge, no facial hair, flat nose, lipless, broad mouth, big teeth, massive shoulders, very little neck, 7.5 feet tall, covered in hair. It has primitive tool use, but most apes have tool use. It can use clubs and rocks and things, but it doesn't have fire. And the Russians took it so seriously that in the days of the Soviet Union, there was a commission to study it. And there's a new commission that started a few years ago. And I was over there in 2008 with some Ukrainian scientists, and both of whom had seen this creature, and I believe I may have got to within 12 feet of one when it was prowling around outside of an abandoned farmhouse at 2:30 in the morning. But there's been some very interesting recent developments with it. Professor Brian Sykes, one of the world's leading geneticists, has looked into these creatures, and he's got some mitochondrial DNA from the tooth of a man who died in the 1950s, who was supposedly a hybrid between a female Almasti and a modern human being. And he got the mitochondrial DNA, that's from the mother's side, and also from mouth swabs from this man's children and grandchildren and relatives. And the DNA he got from it, he says, is very ancient. It's sub-Saharan African. It comes from West Africa rather than East Africa. Whatever these things were, he reckoned they would have been leaving Africa about 150,000 years ago, and he reckons they're pre-human. So we're dealing with possibly a very early offshoot of Homo erectus, or maybe even Homo habilis, but very big, very powerful, very primitive, but a relative of one of the ancestors of man rather than a true ape. The Yeti, we think, may be a surviving form of Gigantopithecus, a giant ape, which is known from the fossil records. Its jaws and teeth have been found in China and Vietnam, and it seems to have been considerably bigger than a mountain gorilla, maybe as much as 10 feet tall. And we think that this is what the Yeti possibly is. But the Almasti is much more man-like.
So now this story of the Almasti in Russia, if I get my facts right, I first remember reading about this story on, who is it now, Lloyd Pye's book, Everything You Know Is Wrong, or something I think it's called, which he goes into a lot of the things about the hominids, and he talks a lot about the, I forget what it was now, the work of the planet.
Boris Brezhnev?
Sorry, say that again?
Was it Boris Brezhnev?
No. I forget his name now. It's a guy that's talking about the aliens coming back in a kind of cycle on their planet, and they basically genetically modified what I think the story goes. They genetically modified Homo whatever, to produce slave workers, which became man. And these are either offshoots of that or the last surviving members of that race or something of the Neanderthals or whatever you want to call it, And so he was suggesting in the book, or so the story goes, at least as far as I can recall, that this was maybe caught in Russia and sold to different people throughout the years. And guys in the local village were going to have sex with this female Sasquatch or Almasti, whatever. And this is where the offshoot of the offspring came from. And as Lloyd Pye said, who'd want to go and do that? I mean, she was as ugly enough to make a train take a dirt track, Yeah,
well, that's the mention of aliens and stuff just makes my heart sink. This is drivel. It has nothing to do with cryptozoology. It has nothing to do with the Almasti. It's just unnecessary nonsense. This animal it's a relative of one of the ancestors of man. There's nothing to do with alien manipulation there. That's a silly fantasy from people who don't understand zoology or paleontology. Now, Zaina, she was called Zaina. Her name was Zaina. She was caught in the Caucasus Mountains in 1850. She was captured, and she was very wild and savage when they first caught her. She was about 6'9", covered with reddish black hair, black skin, very ape-like, ugly face. But she was kept on a farm, and eventually she tamed down. Never learned to talk, but she would do menial tasks around the farm. And when she wasn't doing this, she'd be banging flints together, which suggests she was trying to make some sort of a primitive flint axe. She was very fond of liquor, and if she could get hold of liquor, she would just drink and drink and drink until she was insensible. And in that condition, several of the local men, who must have been terribly desperate, had sex with her while she was unconscious. Right. And she had a number of hybrid children. The first few she tried to wash in a river, and they died of shock because they weren't full-blooded Almasti. The others were then later taken in by the local people and raised as by the local villagers. And they took after their father in that they didn't have the ape-like look of the mother, but they were tall, swarthy, and very, very strong. And the last of them, a man called Quit, died in 1953. Zaina herself died in about 1890. So we got the Quit's skull was found. His grave marker was found. His skull was taken. It was at the Darwin Museum in Moscow for many years until a guy called Igor Bortsev brought it, and he gave some of the teeth to Brian Sykes, and Sykes got some of the swabs off Quit's living blood relatives, and that's how he got this DNA.
So did they never actually go back to the original grave of Zaina?
They lost it. They don't know where Zaina's grave is. There is a skull that's alleged to be Zaina's, but it's only from the general area. It wasn't found with a grave marker like Quit's was, and a lot of my friends from Russia and the Ukraine think this is a red herring. It isn't actually Zaina at all. It's just a slightly deformed modern human skull.
Right. Okay. So you're both going back to Russia now to track these creatures as far as you can down. And have you got any? Like, has anyone tipped you off that there's been sightings in certain areas that you're heading out to?
Well, we go with a Ukrainian biologist who's actually seen one of these things from very close up. His name's Gregory Panchenko. And he's saying, yes, there have been recent sightings, and we've got an itinerary of the places we're going to do where there's been recent sightings.
Right, okay. And so, Jackie, you've seen these things before close up, though, is that right? Or Sasquatches, or...?
Yeah, the second expedition I went on looking for Bigfoot, be about 2-3 years ago now. Went with somebody I call my mentor now, Tom Contral, who's been Bigfooting for I think 45 years now. And we were in Northern California, and at the time we didn't realise when we were driving, we're actually 2.5 miles from where the famous Patty, walking across the creek shot was taken. And it was 20 to 4 in the afternoon. It was quite light. Now, a lot of Bigfoot or Sasquatch, as they can be called, are seen in the dark. People see them in twilight or in the dark. They just get a silhouette. But we're really lucky it was daylight. And suddenly there'd been a forest fire. So the one side of the road was all burnt out on the right as we're facing, and the left side was still very green trees. And they shot out from the trees, and I'm sort of looking at them, and your brain does a double take because you're used to seeing people, you're not used to seeing Sasquatch. So your brain tries to categorize it in what you know. So I'm looking at these pretty tall guys, what I thought were guys, which looked like they were an all in one that was like a blacky slatey grey, like almost black, but almost looked like it got dust on it. And then I could see these domed heads, but I rationalised it was a hood up. And then I'm thinking, God, it must be really killing their feet running on that ground barefoot. Your brain, you just can't perceive what you're seeing. And then I saw them for about 4 or 5 seconds, and they shot into the burnt out tree area. And my friend hadn't had to brake then. And suddenly they were right in front of the car. And they panicked because they obviously couldn't get cover, and they'd come back on the road again. And then they were really at the last minute, they were 15 feet away from the car. I actually pulled my arm up really quick, expecting them to be on my lap any minute. We were so close. And my friend slamming on the brakes. And at that point, they dithered. They didn't know what to do, because originally they were running about 30 miles an hour. And then they dithered for about 1.5 2 seconds. And I thought we're going to hit them. And then I got a really clear view, and you got this really ugly looking face, a proper nose. It wasn't a gorilla nose. It was like a flattened nose, but quite broad, and a very big jawline, very wide mouth, and a very, very big brow ridge. And the eyes were a lot larger than a human's and almost all black. I couldn't see much white at all. And they were, so the skin was quite sort of dark, like a very dark olive. And the shoulders, I just remember thinking, my brain was still rationalising they were people. So I thought they've got one of these all-in-one throwaway overalls like mechanics have, those sort of semi-paper material overalls. And it almost looked like they got, I was still rationalising, thinking those shoulders are massive. They must have like a rucksack underneath across the shoulders, which makes less sense than them being Sasquatch, really. And I just remember thinking, God, they're ugly, really ugly blokes. And they were acting like spooked animals, not like a human. They were sort of freaking out, but they weren't, they looked at us, but there was also avoiding of eye contact. And I thought, whoa, that's really bizarre behaviour. And then my friend carried on driving. He said, oh, you're lucky, aren't you? God, you've seen one. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, what are you here looking for? And I said, Bigfoot. And he said, you've just seen them. And I'm going, I can't have. And for 2 days, I was in complete denial. My brain couldn't cope. And then on the end of the second day, I just went into shock and couldn't stop shaking for about 2 hours and just going, oh, my God, I've seen Bigfoot, quite bizarre.
So how many of them did you see in one go?
Two.
Two of them?
And my friend said there were 2 males. The one, I would have said 6.5 and 7 foot. My friend, who's ex-forces and probably a better judge of height, said there were 7 and 7.5 foot. But one was an older male. There looked like a bit of grey on it. And the other one, he said, was an adolescent male.
So it was caught in literally like a deer in the headlights, sort of stunned, didn't know what to do kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was broad daylight, so the headlights weren't on, but they were just freaked, and they were obviously really scared of us. And there are accounts of Bigfoot throwing rocks at you. They didn't attempt to do that, although, they can do, and coffee table size rocks they tend to throw at people. But they just wanted to get out of our way. They looked really, really scared and freaked by us, and they just went in. And funnily enough, most people say, well, did you go back? Did you try to follow them? Did you look for footprints? But most people who see a Bigfoot on the road, to start with, they're not expecting it. And two, they're so spooked that they don't act rational. And it wasn't until the next day we went back, and it had been raining it hadn't been much rain, but it had been raining the next day. So there wasn't any, couldn't really see anything. But I went to the slope they'd run down, and it was incredibly steep. It was nearly sheer. So there's no way a human could have gone down there the speed they were going without breaking their neck. So, that was more evidence they weren't human, really, for me.
So when your friend slammed the brakes on, they ran pretty much back into the woods or the forest.
Yeah, they went down exactly the way they'd come. Yeah.
Right. So you was actually in their territory, I presume, and there could be presumably a good chance if you went back to that place like you did, like a day or two later. But if you went back there maybe next week or something and ventured around that area, there could be a good chance that you could catch a few again, maybe.
This is one of the most top sites. There's about some sites that you can almost guarantee you'll get some sign of Sasquatch, and this is one of them. It's up a road just out of a little village called Orleans in Northern California, and I think it's called the OS Road. It's Orleans, and I can't remember the place it was meant to go to. It never got there. It's a logging road. It's pretty spectacular. It's all sort of, grit on it, and, you can drive it quite fast. And it's incidentally the one Dom Jolly tried to go down when he wrote the book. Is it Richard's Super Monsters?
Scary Monsters.
Scary Monsters, Super Creeps. And it was the road he tried to go down, but he tried to go down in winter and he got stuck and had to be dragged out because he got stuck in the snow. But it's that road, and there's the campsite at the end, and it is one of the best spots for seeing Sasquatch. And as I said, it was literally 2.5 miles from where the Bluff Creek shot was taken, in the late 60s.
Now Dom Jolly's a big fella, so there's no chance of you mistaking him for the Sasquatch, was there?
No, I don't think so. No, it's a little bit bigger than him, even. Yeah.
He's not quite as hairy enough, I don't think.
I don't know. You don't shave too much if you're living in the wilds for a few days. Andy, you're familiar with this Patterson film, the Roger Patterson film from 1968? Have you seen it?
Yes, I have. Yeah, I mean, there's been so much debate about it, whether it's a man in a suit. Some people say they can see the zip lines. Other people say no, it's genuine. The way it walks is, and the proportions couldn't possibly be human. I'm really on the fence with it. I'm really kind of like neutral. I'm one of those people where, like, if I saw it, I don't know if I'd want to see it, but if I saw it, I'd believe it. But I don't doubt for a moment that, especially when you have more than one witness, that they're seeing something. My only thing that I would say is that this thing about them not being aliens or having nothing to do with aliens as being rubbish, I would have to disagree. Now, I wouldn't actually say that I believe that they are aliens, but who knows? They could be coming from a different dimension, and who knows that they weren't seeded here or the result of some kind of test tube genetic experiment by some off-world group. I don't think we can really know that to be true or false.
There's no need to drag that in, though. They make perfect sense as animals that evolved on Earth. You might as well say, I think bears were developed by aliens, or I think rhinos were developed by aliens. They're a creature that fits in naturally with our world. They're just animals that we don't know. The gorilla, the mountain gorilla, was a hairy ogre from native folklore until 1904. The okapi, which is a short-necked giraffe, its nearest living relatives died out 15 million years ago, wasn't discovered until 1915. More recently, there's things like the dwarf tapir that was discovered in South America. So new animals turn up all the time. And here's a quandary for you. Here's a really, really strange thing about how modern science works. A theoretical physicist can write a paper, a scientific paper, on a particle that nobody has ever seen. It's inferred by the actions of other particles. That's perfectly fine, according to science. But if a zoologist writes a paper on an animal that thousands of people have seen, but we haven't caught one yet, then that's heresy. He's a scientific heretic.
Very good point.
And I'll tell you a great example of this. There was a man who died of starvation in a Parisian gutter in 1820. And his name was Pierre Denis de Montfort. You won't have heard of him. Very few people have. Even scientists, very few of them have heard of him. But during his lifetime, he was one of the most celebrated scientists in the whole of Europe. And he was born in France in the 1760s. And he became a biologist and specialised in the study of mollusks. And he became so well respected and so famous, he was attached to the Natural History Museum in Paris. He was attached to the Botanical Gardens and the university. He wrote a number of books. He was sent on expeditions, geological, biological, all across Europe and as far afield as Egypt. And he studied octopus and squid, amongst other things. And he got talking to whalers from Nantucket who had settled in Paris. And he talked to a number of them. And they said that they had seen huge sucker marks on the sides of sperm whales. And they said that dying sperm whales had often vomited up huge tentacles, far more massive than the tentacles of any octopus or squid known to science. And he postulated the existence of the giant squid and thought it might be behind the stories of the kraken from Norse mythology. This is years and years before the giant squid was actually found. And because of that, because of his theories of there being a squid of immense size, he became a scientific pariah. He lost his job. No one would employ him. And he spent his days trying to earning a living identifying seashells for people, and eventually died of starvation in a gutter when he was one of the most respected scientists in the whole of Europe. And in 1857, he was proved correct when the first giant squid was captured. He was right all along, but because he had these theories, he was looked on as a complete pariah.
That's quite sad, isn't it? It's very intolerable that people will do that, and rather than say, yeah, okay, that's plausible, but you know, let's see what's out there and just give it time to see if anything manifests. It's quite sad that people will treat people like that, just on a theory, really.
And the same happened to Grover Krantz, who's one of the what we call the Four Horsemen of Sasquatchery. The people who really started the research into this. He got, he was doing really well, and he said, he got a lot of really good footprint casts and said, I think this thing exists. And he, again, was demonized, and he could only get a position after that in quite a menial university when, he would have had, really high status university. So, it is a shame. And I think in America, I'll go back to the Patterson-Gimlin film in a minute, but, that there's a lot of things against this, partly because of the very strong Christian views, because if it's accepted there's hominids, it will challenge the whole creationist idea. And also an awful lot of America has investments, a lot of politicians have investments in logging. And if it's found to be a rare hominid or ape in the forest, they will have to stop logging in the area. And this happened, I think, was it a long-eared owl, Richard, or
spotted owl? Spotted
owl. It was discovered in Oregon, and literally they lost, I think it was billions to the economy. It was a ridiculous amount. And, people were nearly starving because they couldn't log in the area. So it is a really sensitive point.
It's interesting, yeah. Something that most people don't actually take into consideration. I do remember reading about the panda bear being a kind of mythical creature for quite a long time. No one believed it existed until this, I forget the name of the lady, I think it's a British lady, went out to deep China and took some guides with her and actually went in, and I'm not sure if she brought one back dead or alive, but she certainly came back with her and proved that, in fact, the panda was really as real as the myths were suggesting, and that was only 100 years ago.
When was this? 100 years ago,
yeah,
then?
Roughly.
It was, I believe, if memory serves, it was Theodore Roosevelt's son. and they found one that was hibernating and shot it while it was hibernating and brought it back.
Ah, okay. I thought it was a lady, and I thought it was a British lady, so I might be getting my wires.
She might have brought the first live one back.
Ah, okay. That
Yeah,
might understand it. Yeah. So, back to the Patterson film then, Jackie. So, what's your point of view on that?
Well, I actually know, I'm friends now with Bob Gimlin. He was, Patterson was the person holding the camera, and Gimlin was the other guy with him. And I met Bob. I'm friends with him now. And my friend Tom Cantrell, who's very close friends with Bob, said, you'll know within 10 minutes this guy did not fake it. And he's very true, because Bob is such a genuine man. Is very religious man, very, very honest, very, very transparent. When you ask him about Patty, he'll say, oh, well, I could have been set up by, Patterson, but I don't think I was. We were tracking it for 3 days. It looked real. He's very open to discussing it. He'll admit to you that, this was over 40 years ago. His memory could be distorted, but, he said what he saw looked very much like a real animal. And there's also interesting Bill Munns, who's the Hollywood guy. He's a film expert. He's also the one who's involved in doing the costume for Harry and the Hendersons, the Bigfoot movie. He was asked to analyse the Patterson and Gimlin film, and he was a skeptic to start with. When he was asked to analyse this film, suddenly said, oh my God, this thing is definitely real. And one of the reasons he gave was, one of the big reasons was the way it moved, and two, there was no stretch fabric in those days. Even Planet of the Apes, it wasn't stretch fabric. They were quite rigid fabrics. They didn't have stretch fabrics. And he said, you can see a stretch. So it would have been completely impossible. And I know I can't remember the name of the guy who created the model, the costumes for Planet of the Apes. He was asked, had it been him who'd done it? Because there was one theory that he'd made the Patty costume, and he said, I'm good, but I'm not that good. And there's other things as well. You can actually see on one of the legs, you can see tendon damage. Now, it's not the sort of thing you would have thought they would have put in, and also it's a female Bigfoot. Now, it's a real macho culture in those days. You're going to have a monster. You're not going to have a female one with breasts. You're going to have a big macho male one with a lot of muscles.
Exactly the same thing, actually, because, other people say, oh, it's fake. And I said, look, why would you go to the extent of having to fake breasts on a costume if it's easier to make a male costume, like a gorilla suit with a bit of extra hair or something? And that's always stuck with me, the fact that, it is definitely a female. It's been identified as a potential female by various people. And like you say, I've seen documentaries where they got like 5 or 6 scientists or whatever in a room, and they kind of did CGI computer breakdowns of its movement, as you're saying, and the walk or the gait of it was very, very. It showed that it had a lot of weight to it as it was walking, and it was the way it was swinging its arms or something. I can't remember the whole thing, but they said that the walk was just too not human enough, for a human to be faking.
I think that was the documentary. It's Sasquatch, Where Myth Meets Science, isn't it? The one with Jeff Meldrum in it, Professor Jeff Meldrum. And it's an amazing documentary, that really, really good. And there's also a book that goes with it that gives more detail. But there's the guy who reckoned he was in the suit. I've spoken to people about him who's met him. He's well known for being a compulsive liar, and unfortunately has done lie detector tests, but compulsive liars can pass lie detector tests very easily. They don't give any markers for anxiety, so they don't pick up the lies at all. So it can be very convincing. And he's been examined. His profile has been matched over Patty's, and his torso is far too short. The whole shape of him is completely different. Well, so it's definitely not him.
Well, our friend Ben Emlyn Jones, who hails from Oxford, he's done talks on skeptics and things like that. And in his skeptic talk that he did for our High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup group, he brought up this film in passing. And he said, and I can't remember the name of the person he brought forth as supposedly admitting that he faked it, but they offered no proof of how they faked it, but he said, oh, it was his wife in the suit. But as Ben said, how can you have like a 6'7" or whatever person, supposedly as your wife? You know, if your wife is 5'3" or 4.
Yeah,
or 5,
they keep changing their stories as well. They never keep consistent story to what happened as well, which makes you more suspicious, really.
The film, I mean, even based on the fact that of what the creature's doing in the film, where it gets spotted and there's a lot of camera shake, because I think presumably the story goes they jump off their horses and he runs towards it with his...
Well, Patterson, his horse actually freaked, and I think it partly fell on him or something. He had to drag his leg from under the horse, I think, and then something like that. I know the horse he had to drag himself from the horse, and then he had to grab the camera. And I mean, when I saw that, you know, it's sort of, most people say when they see a Bigfoot, they're shaking all over. Okay, they were looking for it, but you're not going to be able to hold a camera still, you know. And there's old cameras, you had to keep them really, really still. And the excitement, you know, must have been phenomenal to actually see it. So, you know, you haven't got the sort of lens stabilization systems like you have nowadays. So, you know, it wouldn't have been that good a shot. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually sort of heading off away from them. And then looked back, and I remember a description being given saying it had a look of disgust on its face or something, like, oh, you've really peed me off today because you've come into my territory and I was having a drink of water or something by the river, and it looked really peed off. And it obviously didn't threaten them because it walked away, but it was the fact that it walked away, and rather than, if you're going to fake it, you would think, okay, come out and beat your chest or throw a rock at us or something. It didn't do any of that, which does suggest to me that it was a real creature of sorts.
You would have had a better shot of it, and I think, you know, that era of filmmaking and television, you know, they did things very elaborately, as you said. I think it would have been, they would have made a lot more of it if it had been faked. I agree with that.
Yeah, and there's obviously, now with the age of video, there's a lot of people going around various locations and things and trying to capture Sasquatches, Bigfoot and all that kind of stuff. And I've seen a lot of other potential videos. I'm sure you have too. I mean, what's your opinion on these other videos that have surfaced over the years?
Trouble is, people are using the wrong camera gear. They're often using small, you know, cheap camcorders that have only got automatic focus, which can't cope with trees because, you know, it keeps sort of going backwards and forwards trying to get the focus. And they're absolutely hopeless to use in a tree area. I mean, you need a manual focus, but I think as well, you know, and often it's sort of dark, so you're not, you know, and you'd have to have a manual focus that's really good in low light. You know, there's things like the C100 now, I think there's a C300 as well, you know, a Canon one that's got amazing low light, you know, and you can do manual, so things like that. But these action cams are really good because they can cope with the movements, you know, and night vision as well. But the thing is, you know, it's like when we saw, I mean, I'd got really bad luck when I saw them because I'd ordered a new camcorder that had a really good zoom on it. But sadly, I found that the replacement battery from Panasonic was almost as expensive as the camera. So I'd sent to Germany for a replacement, you know, cheaper replacement, and they sent the wrong one, and that arrived a day before I was flying out to America. So the day I saw them was the charging day, not the day when I had the camera on, which was a really bad luck. So now when I go along, I've got like action cams on every front, back, the lot, you know, but it's the fact is though, most people say they're so freaked when they see it that they either drop their camera or they can't film while they're handshaking so much because they are, you know, if I was out the car, I would have been terrified. They're pretty massive, you know. Most people say that, you know, the primitive instincts kicks in and they want to get out of the way. You know, there was a guy who saw one with his family and they said he had a camera on him. I said, why didn't he film? He said, because it could have eaten my children. I wanted to get my children out of the way, you know.
Yeah, so that's been the case. A lot of people sort of when they've seen UFOs and they said, why didn't you film it? And they said, it didn't occur to me. I was just so gobsmacked at looking at the object that I forgot that I'd got my camera on me. Andy, when you've gone out and done kind of ghost research, ghost hunting, things like that, have you seen anything that's kind of sort of, I don't know, frightened you or scared you so much that you forgot to grab a camera or anything like that?
Only some of the village locals.
Well, I think that covers every area then, doesn't it? Yeah.
But in terms of spooks and ghosts, no. In terms of cryptozoology, definitely no at this stage.
And how do you think you'd be if you were faced with a Sasquatch or a Almasty or something, and you had your camera? Do you think you'd be freaked out, or do you think you'd cope?
I would. It depends on the distance, first of all. If it was 2 foot in front of me, that would be a bit of an issue. If there was a fair bit of distance, say kind of half a football pitch, 50 metres, I would like to think okay, grab the mobile, get this down on evidence. So yeah, it's kind of a case of you don't really know how you're going to react until you're there, kind of thing. And very often, yeah, you might be in a kind of flummoxed state and only really think afterwards, actually, I really should have grabbed the camera. Yeah, I mean, I've been like that in certain ghosty hunt situations where I thought, actually, it might have been a good idea to document this a bit more.
Now, I mean... Sorry, Jackie, go on.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it like I've been in a couple of car accidents, and my memory of it is like a car accident. It's like a trauma thing, you know, your sort of brain slows everything down, and, you know, they're probably in front of me for probably 8-9 seconds at the most, probably less than that, but your brain slows it all down. So you're not functioning normally at all. You're just in shock, basically, you know, when you're seeing them. So, you know, suddenly grabbing your camera just doesn't come into your mind.
Yeah. Now, one of the stories I've read about this Patterson film is that, and it's not widely known about, and maybe you know this, I don't know, but is apparently he returned there the next day with dogs to track possibly the
he
scent
did, yeah.
of the thing.
Yeah, Bob's told me that, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where that led to, though. I mean, can you fill us in on what the sequel to that was?
I think they tracked for a while and then they lost the scent, from what I remember Bob telling me. I'll have to ask him again, but I think they did manage to track for a bit and then they lost the scent. They never saw her again after that one sighting.
So they never bothered to return to that area, thinking, well, that's obviously a hot spot, perhaps, or did they just give up?
They did do, I think, yeah. But Bob's only he's not had a really good view like that in the daylight before. He says he does reckon he's seen one since. He was camping once, and he said he saw something really tall step back from in the shadows that looked like the silhouette of one, but he's never seen another one since. But I think Bob is about 84, 85 now, and he still goes Sasquatching.
Wow.
And it's really nice for him because he was ridiculed for years, and now you've got programs like Finding Bigfoot now, where people are starting to, you know, make it acceptable to believe in Bigfoot, and all these people are, you know, because years ago, if you came out with this, you know, they're very closely knit, some of these little towns in America, and you're very reliant on your neighbours, and if you came out with this sort of stuff, you'd be completely ridiculed and ostracised. So, you know, you didn't do it, and he really, you know, had the mick taken out of him, he said. And now, you know, and he didn't want to talk about it for quite a long time, and now he's accepted. He loves it. He said he loves to go and meet people. He's the nicest bloke out, really, really friendly. And he said it's great that people actually believe him now, you know.
That's great. But there's also the story. Remind me the story of, I think it's Albert Ostman, the guy who was, I think he was a gold prospector from, I think he had moved to America, and I can't remember where, possibly Germany or Poland or somewhere.
He was. I think he was Swedish or Dutch. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Do you want to remind our listeners of that story, because it's a very interesting story? And again, like Bob, he was very, very reluctant to come out, and it's only after he started to read, like 30 years after experience, other accounts in magazines that he then came forward with his story.
I think he was either gold prospecting or trapping anyway for furs. And he was in his sleeping bag, and this Bigfoot supposedly grabbed him in his sleeping bag, slung him over his shoulder, and he was like sort of, I think, dropped down to the bottom of the sleeping bag. And supposedly he put his boots in the sleeping bag. Some of it's a bit fantastical. You know, he said he managed to get his boots on as he was going along, which, you know, slung over a shoulder of an 8-foot high carnivorous ape sounds a bit fanciful, but that's what he said, you know. And like Bob, you know, Bob admits your memory can get a bit distorted probably as time goes by. to a level. So it might have been added to, but the basic, it's supposed to have carried him along for miles and then took him to a cave, and there was other Sasquatch in the cave. And some of it is quite interesting because he goes into detail about the nests they'd done, and he said it was woven. Now, I've seen mountain gorilla nests, and they look like they're done by a human. They're like this sort of almost primitive weaving of the undergrowth. So that was, accurate to what apes will do. And he reckoned that his theory was that the male had kidnapped him to mate with one of the females. And he probably got scared at this point. And he got near one of the males, and I think he managed to give it some of his snuff. And I think it, which you can probably correct me if the story's wrong, started to choke. And that's when he made his getaway, and he ran as fast as he could and got away. But I think they kept him there for a couple of days, supposedly.
That's what I read. Yeah, there was like some a boy and a girl Sasquatch, presumably the members of the family, and he was kept there for about 6 days, 4 days, something like that. Yeah,
so I think they fed him as well on berries.
Yeah, he got a good amount of observational kind of evidence, I suppose, and. Yeah, and the snuff, he gave it some snuff or something, and it got a bit high or something, and
it started choking, and that's when he met, and it
started to eat the snuff, a whole packet of snuff, and it started choking, and he made a run for it while it was going on washing its mouth out.
Right, okay, and then this was like in 1927 or something, I believe.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Mid-20s.
So he didn't tell anyone for at least 30 years until one day he read an article about someone else spotting a Sasquatch or Bigfoot in a magazine. So he decided to come forward with his story and told, I think it was like a sheriff or something of wherever state he was in, who listened to his story, and he kind of said, I've never met such an honest guy in all my life, and I've seen criminals lie on everyone. And this guy's story just comes across as true as anything, and he believed he was making an honest statement, although he couldn't obviously provide physical proof in the way of photographs or anything, because he obviously wasn't expecting to encounter such a thing.
Well, that's right, and it was told 30 years later, so it's possible he'd embellished it a bit. Memory's not that good over long time. So, he probably wasn't intentionally doing that. But it's interesting, though, saying about, he sort of spoke to a sheriff, that there's a really interesting Sasquatch researcher, David Paulides, who's an ex-police detective who's got really into the Sasquatch side. And he's written some really good books, The Hooper Project, where he went around interviewing First Nation people of the Hooper tribe, which is a tribe that's very close to where the Bluff Creek patty shop was taken. I've driven through the Hooper Reservation.
Can I just stop you there, Jackie? I'll tell you why. It's very interesting. We're about to take a break, though. And as all radio stations take a break, they always interrupt their person halfway through, and I'm kind of keeping up that tradition. So I'll say we'll resume this story if that's okay with you.
That's
we'll backtrack
fine.
A little bit. What we'll do, ladies and gentlemen, we'll just take a break here, listen to a few commercial breaks and things, and we'll resume very shortly. Stay tuned. We're talking to Richard Freeman and Jackie Tonks, cryptozoologists, and it's proven very fascinating. We're talking about Sasquatches and all strange creatures. So stay tuned, and we'll listen to more in part 2.
This here is Maynard from down south in Tennessee, and my family came to this country on the Mayflower, so I embraced my British roots by listening to the Paranormal UK radio network. Boy, howdy, now I gotta go get me some pork rinds.
Demons Dwell, The Tower, is a thrilling novel of supernatural terror by Irene Allen Block and Mark Johnson. A hidden evil torments a young couple in a small Italian village along the Mediterranean coast and threatens to destroy their once peaceful lives. As the dark forces close in around them, hope arrives in the form of 2 paranormal investigators. Using their psychic abilities and research experience, the pair quickly finds themselves embroiled in a 100-year-old mystery involving satanic cults and terrifying entities. As they confront the evil forces around them, the investigators are drawn further into the dark and mysterious world hidden beneath the seeming tranquility of an ancient Italian village. Demons Dwell, The Tower, is now available on glenattai.com, amazon.com, and barnesandnoble.com.
Hello, this is Lord Lewis Smythe, formerly of the House of Lords, and you're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Oops. Sorry about that.
Hello and welcome back to the Paranormal Peep Show with myself, Neil Geddes-Ward, and Andrew Chaplin. Are you still there, Andrew?
I am indeed, yes.
Jolly good.
And yeah, I've got a question about the crossover between the cryptozoology world and kind of like, how could you call it? Kind of urban myth stroke legends, and whether you guys believe in that kind of thing. And what I mean by that is things like, for instance, maybe the Mothman or the Slender Man. Now, the weird thing is about the Slender Man is that it started off more as kind of like a comic book character. But there were then kind of reports that people have started seeing this Slender Man. And there is a kind of like an idea that Nick Redfern goes with, I think, in that sometimes thoughts create reality, that maybe like with enough intense kind of thoughts, they almost manifest these things into reality. And
it's called a tulpa.
Yeah, tulpa. That's the one. That's the one. Well, what are your guys' views on tulpas?
The Slender Man was completely fictitious. It was created by a website. It was created by a guy on a website. Mothman is something entirely different. Mothman was seen independently, and it was seen by hundreds of witnesses around the Point Pleasant area in West Virginia in the 60s, over a period of about 18 months. And similar things have been seen elsewhere. That seems to be more of a paranormal entity per se than what you would generally define as cryptozoology, which is flesh and blood animals that are real in the same way that you and I are. Mothman doesn't seem to have any relationship with any other evolutionary relationship with any other creature on Earth. It's something utterly bizarre. But to get back to tulpas, it's actually a Tibetan thing, and it's pre-Buddhist. The idea is that under intense concentration over very long periods, somebody can create a three-dimensional visible thing or object with the power of their own mind that other people can see and is tangible. You might call it an artificially created ghost, if you will. There was a woman called Dame Alexandra David Neal, who was a French singer, and she travelled widely in Tibet and after years of study, became a Tibetan Lama. And she says that she created over several years a tulpa of a monk, and she envisaged him as a rather jolly, chubby, happy little fellow, and he would follow her entourage around, and people would see him and just think he was another monk. After a bit, he got a sort of slender, sly look to him, and she realised that he was becoming independent, and he was fighting for his independence. So she had to concentrate just as hard to dissipate the tulpa as she did to create it in the first place. I've experimented with tulpa creation myself with some success. So the mechanism by how it works, I don't know. But it seems...
So when you say some success, can you elaborate on what it is that you created and how you did it?
I created the tulpa of a huge spider in a cellar in my student digs in Leeds.
So was that kind of like a meditation process that you did beforehand, or how did you do that?
Well, it started out with a party. I threw a party, being a student. This is years and years ago. I was celebrating 10 years of being a goth, and I threw a big goth party in the cellar of this old house that I used to rent. And we had big pictures up of H.P. Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe and stuff like that. And we had the centrepiece of this party was in this room was a big altar to a completely fictional god called Alatak Nakar, who was a spider god created by the writer Clark Ashton Smith, who was a friend of H.P. Lovecraft. And I had a big mechanical spider on it in a huge web, and a bowl of ichor underneath it, and a thame, a sacred knife, on the altar. And we just used it as a centrepiece for the party, just as a piece of fun. And the party went very well. We had a fire eater who set fire to the rubbish in the garden and burnt through the washing line. And I masqueraded as the Red Death from Edgar Allan Poe's Mask of the Red Death. And we had punch with black food colouring in it, and the whole thing was great. It was a great student goth party. But the morning after, when I was clearing up, I didn't have the heart to take down this nice altar. So I thought I will use it as a focus to try and create a tulpa, because it's something I always wanted to do. So I will go down into this dark cellar just by candlelight, and I would meditate in front of the altar, imagining a huge spider manifesting on the altar. And sometimes I would look into a strobe light to go into altered states, or do dervish whirling to achieve altered states of mind. And I'd concentrate on this spider. And I was doing it for several months, and then one day I opened the cellar door. Before I switched the light on or lit any candles or anything, I had an image of a huge white spider against the back wall, but it seemed to be two-dimensional, rather like a negative photograph. And then it sort of faded away, and I thought, goodness me, am I just imagining that? And then a few days later, I saw it again, but this time it was on the stairs down to the cellar, so it was outside of the room where I was performing these rituals.
One of your friends saw it as well, didn't he?
No, not quite. That's Steve. Yeah. I'll tell you about that.
Yeah.
I thought maybe there is something to this. So then I had to go away for the holidays, for the summer holidays, and I was worried that because I wasn't doing these rituals and feeding the tulpa with mental energy, it would fade away. But I came back from my holidays to find a whole load of weird spider stuff had been going down while I was away. There'd been, across Leeds and Wakefield, there'd been a plague of enormous spiders, and people were catching these and taking them to the authorities, thinking that they were giant tropical spiders, but they were just Tagenaria domestica, the house spider, but they'd grown into an enormous size. And also, a guy who was unpacking some bananas in Morrison's, a warehouse at Morrison's, was attacked by a spider. And he said a wonderful, wonderful line from the news story. He said, I realised to my horror my face was being attacked by a giant spider. This sort of hand-sized spider had jumped out these bananas from South America and bit him on the cheek. And he was taken to the hospital of tropical medicine in Liverpool, and they kept him waiting 6 hours, and they said, if he isn't dead by now, it couldn't have been that venomous. And luckily it turned out to be a huntsman spider, which are big and scary looking, but not terribly venomous. So he tried to sue the banana company, and his lawyer said, frankly, when a man cannot go to his place of work without being attacked by giant spiders, something's very wrong. And the banana company retorted, well, it's his own fault for doing such a dangerous job as unpacking bananas in the first place. But all this had been happening after I'd been doing these spider rituals. So I carried on doing the rituals, and then a friend of mine, Steve Jones, who was actually Britain's first pagan magistrate, who's a witch and a psychic, he claims to be able to go into a house and tell if it's haunted. He went down into the cellar, and he said he could feel something there, but he wasn't really sure what it was. When I switched the lights out, he freaked out because he said he felt like he was being wrapped in webs, and he's a bit of an arachnophobe. Anyway, about a year later, I carried on doing this. I had another party on exactly the same date, but this time I got everybody in on the ritual. I got everybody who was at the party, including a load of girls who were just passing by. And one of the guys there said, "Oi, girls, do you want to come to a party?" And they came in thinking they were going to go to an ordinary party, and found a guy in black robes waving a big sword about, and everybody else chanting the name of this spider in an occult ritual. God knows what they thought of it, but they seemed to have a good time. Anyway, they were all around the altar, all these people chanting the name Alatak Nakar and visualising this huge spider. And I realised that, when I left this house, when I left university, the power would dissipate unless I left some triggers there. So what I did in my room where I lived, there was a little crawl space. There was a little door about 2.5 feet high by 2.5 feet wide. You could unscrew, and it just led into a little crawl space of about 6 foot long by 3 foot tall by 2.5 foot wide. God knows what it was for, but it was there. So I got an old biscuit tin and filled it full of pseudo-occult junk. I made a fictionalised diary of somebody who finds a ancient spell book and summons up this terrible spider entity and slowly goes insane and gradually goes mad and has these terrible visions. And I put old parchments in there that I'd treated with chemicals to make look old, and I'd written stuff in Latin in them, and on stuff I'd copied from H.P. Lovecraft books, sealed them with black wax. Weirdly, when I was walking home from university once, I saw this object bobbing along in the wind towards me, and it stopped exactly at my feet, just stopped, and it was a massive dead spider curled up. So I covered that in black wax, put that in the box, and then I left the box in this crawl space, hoping that someone would find it. And I left and read the diary and get increasingly worried, and then their anxiety would feed the tulpa. I also left the altar room intact with the spider and the altar and everything, but I rigged the light bulbs to explode. So I found out about 18 months after I'd left university from a friend that I used to live with, the guy that got my room after me was a born-again Christian. And he opened up this little door, wondering what was behind it, found the old biscuit tin. What's in here? I opened it up, read the diary with mounting horror, ran down to the dark, dank, foul-smelling cellar, switched the light on. The light bulb had gone boom, and in the flash he'd seen the altar to this completely fictional spider god. Apparently the guy freaked out. The house was exorcised by not one but two priests, and the altar was burnt in the backyard. Result. So, but even by repeating this and getting people to think about it, we're feeding the tulpa, the idea of this spider entity, the tulpa.
Now, there's a thing that I could put in here and perhaps interject, is that what if people's intentions or belief in Sasquatch actually manifests them into reality? If there's enough people, think about millions of people believing in Sasquatch.
Great point. Great point. I was on an expedition in 2000 and... Oh, no, it was the year 2000, Year of the Dragon. I was looking for a giant crested serpent in the Mekong River called the Naga. And I was making a documentary for the Discovery Channel. And we stopped at a sculpture park. They were getting some general views of these sculptures. And they had sculptures of the Naga, this great serpent. They had... a thing called the Singar, which is supposed to be a spirit lion that lives in the jungle over there, and they had statues of that. It's a sacred creature. And they had the Garuda, which is a bird man, a creature half man, half bird, similar to the Japanese Tengu. And it struck me that they were very similar to things that were reported from Cornwall. In Cornwall, you have Morgar, the sea serpent, that has been seen, since the Victorian times around Falmouth Bay. You have the mystery big cats, like the Beast of Bodmin and stuff. And then you have the Cornish owl man, which is this bizarre, it's not unlike Mothman, this bizarre winged owl-like entity that's been seen by numerous people since the mid-70s around Morne, an old church and the woods around it in Cornwall. And I thought, hang on, why are they seeing the same things there as they are here? So I thought a bit more about it, and I came to the conclusion that there's a global monster template. Every culture on Earth has very similar monsters. You'll find that every single culture, bar none, has legends of dragons. They're the ultimate monster. Forget about demons and vampires and werewolves and all those. The dragon is the king of the monsters. It's the most ancient monster. It's been traced back to Africa. Before man left Africa, there were legends of these huge reptilian creatures, and they're found in every culture. We have legends of monstrous dogs, werewolves, black dogs, demonic dogs, spirit hounds, big cats all over the world, monstrous birds, the roch, the thunderbird, the Garuda, the Tengu, things like that. We have legends of hair-covered giants, Yeti, Sasquatch, things like that. And we have little people, fairies, goblins, elves. So why should we have all of these things in every culture? And it occurred to me that they're very similar to things that would have been either preying on or being in direct competition with our primitive ancestors, our Australopithecine ancestors, on the plains of East Africa 2-3 million years ago. when the Australopithecines came down out of the trees to exploit a new food source, carrion, on the newly formed savannas, when the forests started to retreat, they would have been preyed on by crocodiles, large pythons, big birds of prey like the martial eagle, leopards and lions, African hunting dogs, and they would have been in competition with other primates. There wasn't just one type of Australopithecine, there were several. Some bigger than our ancestors, some smaller. And there were also other primates like Deinopithecus, which was a huge, immense baboon that lived at the time. So these were all things that would have been in competition with them. Also, have you ever wondered why in a 2-story house, bedrooms are always upstairs, almost always upstairs in a multi-story house? It's because we feel safe in the trees. Our ancestors would climb into the trees at night when they're at a disadvantage and things like leopards can see better. That's why we associate the dark with evil and so forth. Villains wear black because of our primal fear of the dark. Now, I thought that maybe we carry these ancient fears of all these things that preyed on us subconsciously as a species in a gestalt mind, in a sort of hive mind, if you will, an unconscious hive mind. And if one person can create a tulpa through concentration and ritual, could the collective gestalt mind of humanity bring back these ancient terrors and make them corporeal for a time under certain circumstances? Now, that's not to say that there are not analogues of all of these things that are flesh and blood and real the same way that we are, because I think there are. But some of them may be these phantoms from our own minds that we create as tulpas.
Or could it be as well as also the genetic memory stuff about, because people naturally recognise a scuttling thing, they often think it's a spider or a thing that's whittling around as a snake, and that sort of seems to go across all cultures. And when, I can't remember his name, but scientists showed pictures of a fleeting black shape to children in Berlin and children in the Amazon, they both equally judged it as being a big black cat. So there's probably this, genetic, they've definitely shown there is for spiders and snakes a gene that react, our mind reacts. There's a genetic basis to it. So there could be possibly for big black cats and other animals as a protective thing.
Interestingly, there was a medium, he was around just before World War One, called Franek Kluski. And his speciality was manifesting animals at seances. And he would manifest a huge bird similar to a nightjar that would sit on his head. He would manifest a huge black dog, a monstrous big cat like a lion, and this ape-like creature that was so strong it was supposed to be able to pick up a man sitting on a chair as if he was nothing. So he was almost as if this man was tapping in to part of the monster template and bringing forth these ancient archetypes.
I remember reading something about that, a book by Stan Gooch, if memory serves me well. I certainly a reference to that particular. I remember the gorilla or the ape being manifested in a seance room, so I think we're perhaps thinking on the same guy there. It's an interesting story.
Yeah, actually, the book to read on that is Alien Animals by Janet and Colin Board.
Okay, that's one to remember. And Jackie, if we can just recount them back to part one, towards the end of part one of the show, we were talking about Albert Ostman and his encounters with Bigfoot and things, and the fact that he gave a statement to the local sheriff who regarded him as an honest man, and you said, that reminds you of a story of, and I forget the name of the gentleman, we were...
David Polides, He's an ex-police detective, and he's seriously got into, search for Sasquatch, and he goes around, he's got two really good books, The Hooper Project and Tribal Bigfoot. And his first book, The Hooper Project, he goes around. The Hoopers, a tribe that's not far from where the patty shop was taken, Bluff Creek. And he goes around interviewing people, and he gets to sign an affidavit, which is a thing they sign. And basically, they sign this thing to say they're telling the truth. And they can, in theory, be put in prison if they're lying. So it's quite a serious thing to sign. And he goes around with an artist, I think it's Harvey Pratt, who's the guy who does this, did a lot of the serial killer profile pictures. I think he did Bill Mundy, or, he's done a lot of the famous ones. And so he's basically interviewing them like a police detective about what they saw. And then Harvey draws the picture. And this thing is, there's all these in the books, there's all the pictures, and they're almost identical. Some of them occasionally get slightly more ape-like than others, but there is a theory, like Northern California, you get one Bigfoot that's slightly more ape-like than the others. There's the ugly ones and the pretty ones, supposedly, I'm told.
It's Hollywood.
It's a breach, yeah. And, a bit like you do with people, I suppose. But he's getting amazingly consistent results, and a lot of these people are seen as very reliable people he's interviewing. He then goes on to do the is it Missing
411?
Missing 411 series about these strange disappearances of people, and there's hints of that. There's little kids saying the big hairy doggy man or the big hairy berry man carried me around on his shoulders and fed me with berries with his hands, and these are often in winter, and the child should have died of hypothermia. They said they cuddled me at night. So they've got to be describing. There's nothing else it could be other than a Bigfoot
or Rolf Harris.
Yeah.
It's what it is yet.
Anyway, and it's quite, these are proper police reports he's getting, so it's really interesting, and there are some in these missing books, there's some suggestion. I mean, Bigfoot are omnivores, they do kill deer, and there's some suggestion sometimes they're possibly eating people. We don't know. I mean, I know people who've got very close contact with them say no, they won't do that, but they are carnivores. We don't know. They're probably like people. There's some nice ones and some less nice ones. But they're very, very. It's very interesting research. But going back to the paranormal stuff, made friends with Toby Johnson, who's got on YouTube Off Track. If you go onto YouTube Off Track, you'll see him with his son Jude. And they go out Bigfooting. And he's had he was one of the first people on the side of the London Trackway. Where they found, I think it was 122 footprints.
That's not London, England.
No, not London, England. It's London, Oregon. And they're in the mud, loads of footprints. They now possibly think they're fake, but he was one of the first people on the site there. And he's had some really weird things where he's been around Sasquatch and these little lights are like, coming in front of him and moving away. I mean, there are volcanic areas there, so there could be plasma, there could be something to do with the volcanoes. But there's also been really weird things where he's followed footprints and they've just stopped in the middle of a field and gone nowhere, and they're not going up a tree. There's no tree there. And he said it's really freaky. And I mean, there are these things that people reporting seeing glowing red eyes without there being anything, to reflect off them. No lights, no moon. So you do get some, and, them associated near UFOs sightings. So I think, that the two don't have to be related, but some of it, he said, he was very sceptical. Some of it, he said, is a bit bizarre.
Now, it's interesting. We're back to the UFOs again, and I have heard reports and read reports and seen people interviewed that have, not every single UFO case, obviously, but some, where, as well as seeing the typical greys or the Nordics or whatever, they seem to sometimes appear as well, whilst they're with the aliens, there seems to be a tall Sasquatch somewhere in the background that seems to be associated in some way with the encounter. Either these come on board like Chewbacca or something, he's probably the co-pilot or something. But I remember there's a Richard D. Hall film, richplanet.net, for those that want to look into this, and he talks about the Gateshead Grey, which was a story that he researched in Gateshead in the northeast of England, near to where he originates from. And he spoke to this gentleman who, I think it was in the 1930s, just before World War II came about, and there was this boy who was 5 or 6 at the time, and they all used to play in the back streets and things and in the alleyways of that area. And he said that one time this well, he didn't call it a UFO, he said this shimmering object was there with these small creatures, and he didn't call them greys because that's, he's coming from a different era. But he said with them, when they were starting to be pulled onto this craft for examination, with them there was this great big tall hairy creature. He said it was like what you call Bigfoot, he said, and he was quite honest about it. He said, I know it sounds rubbish and crazy and weird, but the story's weird in itself, but this was there with them. And I've heard...
That's a bit more believable in a way, because, I mean, it's like, there's been so much media about Bigfoot recently, and people are primed with ideas, so the older stuff would be a bit more believable, I think.
He was coming forward with descriptions of greys, but also he was coming description of people that are humanoid, and they had slightly longer hair, and he said, like your hair, to Richard D. Hall, because Richard D. Hall has sort of shoulder-length hair, and he goes, about as long as yours, Richard, he was saying, which sounds classically like the descriptions given of the Nordics in UFO folklore. And again, this guy was 5-6 years old at the time, but he remembers it, and his sister remembers her brother talking to the police about it, and his uncle, who's unfortunately lost his marbles now, remembers seeing them as well, but they can't really question on it because he's now gone a bit sort of dementia-y. But they got a policeman involved at the time who, I believe, when he was getting chased down the street by one of these grey creatures, he says, it's coming for me, because this was not just one occurrence, it was happening like over a 3 or 4 month period, and they were taking the local kids on board the craft, apparently. Excuse me. This policeman saw it, and he got like a coal shed shovel, because obviously everyone over a coal shed there, he grabbed it and hit this thing over the head and killed it. And they hid it in the basement of a church for 3 months until the Ministry of Defence, or whoever it was, the Ministry of whatever, came and collected it. And they were told to tell no one about it, which was a very interesting thing. So I'd recommend anyone interested in greys, aliens and Sasquatches and UFOs to... you can find it on YouTube, call it The Gateshead Grey, with Richard D. Hall. It's a very, very interesting hour and a half, I think, roughly, of documentary program making about all that kind of stuff. And obviously it's best to watch it directly from them rather than listen to me about it, because I'll probably get my facts wrong, but that's how I remember it, and I'll probably watch it again this evening, actually. So
talking about a Chewbacca, I had a very Professor Brian Sykes book, Nature of the Beast. In the first chapter he talks about the big guy, and Laurie Simmons, who's the lady who, first made him aware of the big guy, she was the lady I went out with Adam Davis and Andrew Sanderson on the first expedition, and she took us up to the tree to meet the big guy. Now, supposedly the trees are often hollow and rotted out there, and they go into all these volcanic tunnel systems. So in theory, something can be in the middle of the tree, and, there can be something in there. Anyway, she took us up to the tree, and initially we just heard a few taps, and I thought, it's a territorial rabbit or a hare or something. So I didn't take it too seriously. And then the other guys went out, came back shaking, and these are like, there's Tim Friel, who's a zoologist, Adam Davies, literally shaking all over with fear. And I said, what's this then? I said, you've got to come out. And I kept refusing because I thought, oh no, this is silly. And they dragged me out. Anyway, they took me up to this tree, and I stood in front of it, and Laurie said, hello, big guy. Tell Jackie you're there, because she doesn't believe you're there. And suddenly, out the middle of this tree, and I got my hand on the tree so I could hear the reverberation, this thing went, "Urgh!" And I literally threw myself backwards over a log and ended up on my bottom with fear. It was absolutely terrifying. And this thing was like well above my head, so it was obviously really tall. So I'm thinking, this is really weird, So she said, get back up. You'll be all right. Won't hurt you. And she said, shall we play the knocking game? And this thing went, "Arr!" And then she starts doing this knocking, and this thing was matching her knocks exactly. 3 knocks, do 3 knocks. And it was the weirdest stuff I've ever had in my life, talking to a tree. It was just bizarre, but there was something in there that was big with a really loud voice. Anyway, at this point, we moved away from the tree, and Laurie was discussing, she'd hung up this food for it in an orange net, and people from the campsite had seen it. So she's really scared wherever it was going to get, shots. So we're discussing in a loud voice, taking its food away. And suddenly, you should have heard the roar. It actually hurt your ears. We had to put our hands over our ears. This massive roar came out of this tree. And then this thing literally started hitting the inside of this tree like one of those small bulldozers, And we're just looking at each other in complete disbelief, like ready to leg it, because we hadn't yet seen this thing. And we've been trying to sort of track where it was coming from. We reckon it was coming into a tunnel miles away, because two of the guys kept circling, trying to find the entrance to this tree, and they couldn't. So it must have been a couple of miles away. You know, we're doing it for days. And he had this massive tantrum. And then Laurie just shouted over to it, "Don't worry, we'll leave your food." It instantly calmed and went, "Arr!" And it was the weirdest stuff. And for days, we said, we can't possibly discuss this with people. They're going to think we've just lost it, you know, load of scientists all talking to a tree, you know, and for ages, we all agreed we'd discuss it with our closest friends, but we would not publish it. And then it was decided, you know, Laurie published it and then Adam published about it. So we agreed we could talk about it. But when I came back, I spoke to Richard and he said, "What did it sound like?" So I sort of reenacted the voice. And he said, "Did it sound like Chewbacca from Star Wars?" And I said, "Well, it sounded exactly like Chewbacca from Star Wars." And he said, "That was the voice of a black bear." So that was quite interesting. I think that one we probably debunked. Although interestingly enough, around that site, we did find some very good, what looked like Sasquatch footprints, really good footprints. Which we cast some. We did have little stones suddenly appear where we'd raked the ground outside our tents. It wasn't very good for footprints, but we did have little stones appear that seemed to have been thrown. And we did wood knock, and that got boring in the end. They kept doing it back. And you had to control for the echo in the valley, obviously. And we did, on the last day, I'm in the Leet, having a wash in the river, just by the beautiful campsite was, in North Cascades. And suddenly I heard the howl, and I thought, what is that? Because it was really loud, just goes through you, and sounded like a massive gorilla. So there definitely was Sasquatch, probably, you know, pretty sure there was around. And people had seen them. And we also had a thing with the strange ultrasound. We went up a mountain and then we started to feel really nervous and heard a low hum rumble, and had to get out of there. You know, one of the guys who's really brave, Dave Archer, he suddenly freaked. I've never seen Dave. He's completely fearless, throws himself down bear holes looking for stuff. And he said, "I've got to get out of here." And we all went down this mountain very, very quick. So definitely something around there. But this thing in the tree, I think it was probably a bear.
So the thing is, though, if it was a bear, why was it kind of like copying the knocking? Unless
they will do. They're a bit like, they will mimic. You said that, didn't you?
Bears are very intelligent. They're related to dogs, and you can get them quite tame. Even wild ones, that's why you're never supposed to feed them, because they will do things for food, like dogs will. But I think we've talked about Bigfoot for ages now. I think we need to move on.
I was going to suggest the same thing. So, Richard, open the court up a bit. What else can we talk about?
Well, cryptozoology also deals with animals that science tells you are extinct, but are almost certainly still around. Perhaps the most fascinating of these, and it is the logo of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, which is the organisation I work for, is the Tasmanian wolf, or thylacine. Now, this is an animal that looks like a wolf or a dog, but with a stiff kangaroo-like tail and stripes down its hindquarters, rather like a tiger's. But it's not a dog or a wolf or a tiger. It's a flesh-eating marsupial. And it's a great example of convergent evolution. That's where two organisms that are not at all related and often live on opposite sides of the world will evolve to resemble each other because they are fulfilling the same ecological niche. They're doing the same thing. So the thylacine has evolved to resemble the placental wolf because it's hunting in a similar way. The main difference is wolves hunt in packs, thylacines hunted alone or in pairs. Now, the thylacine used to be found all over New Guinea, Australia and Tasmania, and it was supposed to have died out in New Guinea and the mainland a couple of thousand years ago and survived only in the island of Tasmania. When humans first got over there in the early 19th century, they brought sheep with them, which the thylacine took a liking to. Now, the Europeans devastated Tasmania. They wiped out the Tasmanian emu completely. They hunted the Tasmanian Aborigines into extinction, certainly into cultural extinction. The only ones that survived were ones that were completely integrated into white culture. And they hunted the thylacine as well because it was preying on the sheep. and there were several bounties put on it for money paid for thylacine skins or dead thylacines, and a couple of thousand were killed. The last wild one was shot by a guy called Wilf Batty in about 1930, and the last captive one died in 1936 in Hobart Zoo. Since then, there have been over 4,000 sightings of these things, including ones by park rangers and zoologists. Some very, very good sightings. And this is an animal we know existed, and it existed until relatively recently. And I've been over to Tasmania now 3 times to search for this creature. And I've talked to witnesses, old ex-loggers, bushmen, a park warden, all of whom have no axe to grind, but have either seen the thylacine or heard its very distinctive call. And the island of Tasmania is about the same size as Ireland, the country, but the population, the human population, is less than 500,000, and they live mainly in the cities of Launceston and Hobart and a few scattered towns. When you get over to the west of the island, there is masses of wilderness, particularly in the southwest. Mountains, forests, and it's almost certain that the thylacine is still hanging on in there. It's supposed to have a very distinctive smell similar to that of a hyena, and I was on a forest track once and I got this smell. I used to be a zookeeper. I know what a hyena smells like, and it smelled exactly like a hyena. And you could walk through the area where this smell was. It was as if the creature had come across the forest path and left this smell behind it. And we've gone out there with baited camera traps and done night drives with cameras running constantly on the front of our car. I go over with a guy called Mike Williams, who's from mainland Australia. He's been out there 14 times now, so he's really dedicated to the cause. Well, we've yet to see the creature, but I've seen some spectacular evidence, some of which I'm not at liberty to talk about at the minute. I'm utterly convinced this animal is still alive. It's been called the healthiest extinct animal you'll ever meet, and there's a very, very good book by a biologist called Philip Hoare called The Ocean Inside, which is about oceans and islands and life on islands. And there's a chapter about Tasmania, about the genocide of the Tasmanian Aborigines and the thylacine. And at the end of it, he says that there are all these sightings, and yeah, of course, some of them might be hoaxes, but he says that he was in an institute, and he's careful not to name names here. He says that he was in an institute in Tasmania, which probably means one of the 2 big natural history museums, when somebody lets slip something that they shouldn't say, and then hastily says, "Oh, it's not our secret to really to reveal," but by what this person says, and then retracts very quickly. He believes that they know it's still there, that sooner or later they'll admit that this animal is still around.
Why would they keep it a secret, or why would they want to kind of hide it from the world if they know it exists?
Well, there are 2 reasons, 2 main theories. One theory is that it would cost the logging industry a bomb if it was found again.
Again, like the Bigfoot thing.
Yeah, because there was a sighting in the early 80s by a zoologist called Hans Narding, who observed a thylacine by torchlight one evening for about 5 minutes from 20 feet away from the back of his van. And there was a halt to logging there whilst they searched the area. But it seems that logging doesn't really disturb the thylacine that much because they don't have permanent layers. They move on every few days. So some thylacine sightings are in places that have been logged, and it seems not to bother them that much.
That's the same with Bigfoot. They reckon the logging's productive for it.
The other thing is that the thing that I think is the more likely is that they want to protect it. They know it's still there, then they don't want the world and his wife traipsing to these places where it isn't disturbing it. They want to keep it under wraps, and I think that's why they're being a bit cagey.
Or could it be some kind of result of some kind of weird genetic experiment that they're still playing with? Who knows?
No, it's just an animal. It's an animal. It's an animal we thought was extinct, but isn't. That survived, and there's loads of cases like that. Leadbetter's possum was thought to be extinct for years, and it turned.
But all of those cases went public. So why is this one secret? I don't buy the whole it's to protect it thing, because if that was the case, I mean, pandas are protected. Everyone knows that pandas exist.
Yeah, but they were never thought to be extinct. This is a very iconic animal for Tasmania. It's their national emblem. And it was thought to be hunted into extinction. If they found a relic population, they may well be protecting this and keeping it under wraps until they know that the population is secure. Now, wouldn't it make logical sense to secure them by bringing them into captivity and trying to kind of look after them to fully secure them within captivity? Well, the thing is, we know almost nothing about the thylacine because there was no official, proper study of it, scientific study of it, when we know it was still around. That there were ones in captivity that were brought into captivity, but no one ever studied them scientifically, so very little is known about them. So with very rare animals, case in point, things like the Javan rhinoceros and the Sumatran rhinoceros, it's been decided to leave them where they are, to get on with it and protect the areas rather than try and catch and stress. Because catching wild animals and taking them into captivity is very stressful and it can kill them.
And if there's such a low population, you could cause its extinction just by, there's such a limited gene pool probably of a lot of these animals. You've only got to take a couple of individuals out.
And you could cause it. Yeah. And talking of extinct animals, we obviously had this conversation earlier during the week where I was talking about the pterosaur and potential sightings over Papua New Guinea. For pterosaur, that's like pterodactyl for some people. I talked about this story about this guy that was in a plane heading out from Australia to go past Papua New Guinea. I think he was on his way to the Philippines, if memory serves me correct. And he was a pilot, a very sceptical sort of guy, I understand. And he saw this plane coming towards him at 4,000 feet. It was just towards getting twilight, the dusky kind of time. And they noticed it didn't have any landing lights on it. And they thought it was a bit strange, no navigational lights whatsoever. And as they passed it, they all looked and they thought, are we in Jurassic Park? Because they looked across and saw this, pterodactyl basically flying past them. And since that time, I kind of looked into it a little bit more and found that there's lots of sightings of potential pterosaur or pterodactyls in the Papua New Guinea area. And I just wondered, what's your thoughts on that, Richard or Jackie?
Well, I think these are the one. There are two types seen in New Guinea. There's a smaller one, about 6 foot, with a 6 foot wingspan, and there's one with an immense wingspan, 30-40 feet, similar to something like Hartsogopteryx or Quetzalcoatlus, the largest of the pterosaurs. So these things fly. They're in the sky, right? If there was a surviving population of them, I think even in New Guinea, they would be seen much, much more often than they actually are. I think this is... I can't be sure, but I think this is moving more towards a paranormal explanation, in that this might be something to do with a time distortion. It might be something interdimensional, but I very much doubt if there's a population of pterosaurs living in undiscovered in New Guinea, because you've got to remember these things have been extinct for 65 million years. The thylacine was thought to have died out in the mid-1930s. There's a big difference between the mid-1930s and 65 million years ago.
Yeah, of course.
But what you do get on New Guinea are consistent reports of giant monitor lizards. You know the Komodo dragon from Indonesia? That grows to about 10 feet long. It can kill animals as large as buffalo with a poisonous bite. But in New Guinea, there are stories of ones 3 times that size. They call it Artrelia. These huge lizards that are supposed to live in the jungles. And monitor lizards can sometimes rear up on their hind legs, particularly when 2 males are fighting. And in that stance, they might be mistaken for a dinosaur. And they also swim very well with their necks out of the water. So they might be mistaken for dinosaurs. But I think what we've got in New Guinea might be giant monitor lizards. And in Africa too, where there's the Mukele Mbembe, he who dams the river, which is supposedly a dinosaur-like creature that's living in the swamps of the Congo, Lake Tele and the rivers around it. I think that rather than a sauropod dinosaur from 65 million years ago, this is a titanic monitor lizard.
What about on this documentary? Because I did, as I said, I did some more research and found a few YouTube videos, and one of them was a program. I think it was an American show where they'd gone to Papua New Guinea and spoke to the natives and people that populate some of those islands. And there was a story there that one of these pterosaurs, if it was something like that, had actually managed to pick up a guy who was in his village or garden and carried him and sort of dropped him in a tree. And I don't know if it started eating him, but it carried him to a certain extent and dropped him in a tree. But I can't remember the rest of the story. I think he might have been scared off. The creature might have been scared off by villagers.
There's a similar story of someone seeing one swoop down and grab a manatee in its talons and pull off a manatee. Now, the interesting thing is that pterosaurs didn't do that. We see all these films like Planet of the Dinosaurs and 1 Million Years BC and Valley of Gwangi, where pterosaurs swoop down and grab people like eagles with their talons and carry them off. But pterosaurs didn't have talons adapted for grasping things like that. They physically couldn't have done it. They grabbed things with the beak. They snatched at things with the beak. They didn't grab with their talons because the talons weren't used for grasping.
But you could come back with a counter-argument. If it's 65 million years later with sort of evolution and maybe something's developed within them that's slightly
Could have evolved, yeah.
Easily. But also you would have to have a phantom lineage. It would have nothing in the fossil record to suggest that. Now, that's not unprecedented. There are no fossil gorillas, for example. There are no gorillas in the fossil record, and it's only very recently that we found fossil chimpanzees. So it's not impossible that something like this is a flesh and blood creature, but I would say it's more likely to be something, for want of a better word, paranormal, be it interdimensional or something weird like that, rather than real in the way that an elephant is real.
And frigate birds around that area, they do look quite reptilian when they fly. I've looked it up. They can get to 7.5 feet. And you get some, like, the shadow of one. You get some weird reflection type things with sun and clouds. So you could, in theory, and they found with some of the UFO stories that it's like some magnifying reflection thing, that it could well be they've seen reflection of a frigate bird and it looks gigantic, so that's one of the possible explanations.
And another interesting aspect of cryptozoology is known animals that grow to fantastically large sizes, much bigger than we think. In South America we have the anaconda, which is the world's largest snake. We know it grows to around 30 feet long. It doesn't lay eggs. The female stays in water and gives birth to live young. The eggs hatch in her body, and she gives birth to fully formed live young. So they don't have to come out onto land very much to lay eggs or anything like that. They stay in the water, getting bigger and bigger. Now, there are reports from South America of anacondas 45, 50, even 60 feet long. I was in South America searching for some of these things, but unfortunately there was a terrible drought, so we couldn't get out into the very remote lakes where they were supposed to be. But our guide, who was a guy called Damon Corrie, who's a Eagle Clan Arawak chieftain, really nice guy, he said that he met some hunters from his tribe who had been at a remote lake called Corona Falls, and they'd seen an anaconda so vast that they'd just run away from it. And he said, how big was it? And they pointed to a palm tree, which was about 30 feet long, and they said there was a dead palm tree lying on its side in the water that was similar length to that, and the snake's head and neck stretched over one side and its tail stretched over the other. So it was at least 40 feet long. And other areas of the world, we get reports of these gigantic snakes. In 1959, in Katanga, in the Congo, there was a pilot called, what was his name? Alexander, I think it was Alexander Ramey, his name was. And he was a charter pilot. He was a Belgian, and he'd been a fighter pilot in World War II. And he was now a charter pilot after the war had finished, and he was flying across the Congo in Katanga, and he crossed a clearing. And he said in this clearing there was an immense snake, and he said it must have been at least 50 feet long, dark green, and a sort of dirty white underneath. And he said that it had this horse-like head about 2 feet wide, 3 feet long. And he said the whole thing, as the I think he was in a helicopter actually, as he went over, it reared up and tried to strike at the helicopter as it went over, and he made 5 passes and managed to get a photograph of this thing. And it's near some termite mounds, and there's very distinctive termite mounds that are sort of mushroom shaped out there. And it's been calculated by looking at the size of these termite mounds that the snake is around 50 feet long.
Crikey.
That could quite easily eat a horse or a bull.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've seen footage of snakes eating people and cutting them out and things like that. My God.
That's actually, Neil, that's an interesting point, because we were always told at school, well, I was anyway, that don't worry, pythons are not they're not dangerous to humans because they don't eat humans. And then, as you say, there are pictures where pythons have been found where they've eaten.
Yeah, a guy was eaten by a reticulated python in Sulawesi.
That's it. Yeah, I saw the photo, and
it wasn't a particularly big one. It was 23 feet.
Yeah,
it was large, but no whopper.
Yeah.
And then we have stories of giant crocodiles. It's one of the things that fascinates me most. I'd like to go out looking for giant crocodiles. Then the saltwater crocodile grows to 30 feet long. A Nile crocodile about 25 feet. These things have bites that are 10 times more powerful than a great white shark. A great white shark bites down with about 400 pounds of pressure per square inch. A big crocodile will bite down with 5,000 pounds per square inch. And there are stories, again, from places like the Congo, of phenomenally large crocodiles. These things keep growing all their lives. The growth rate slows down as they get older, but they will grow throughout their lives. So in undisturbed areas, you will get monstrously big ones. There's in Agusan Marsh in the Philippines, there's a giant man-eater called potol, which means slasher in Filipino, and he's supposed to be at least 30 feet long.
So crocodiles obviously are pretty good at adapting to changing environments, and that's led me to think about the idea of the dinosaurs dying out 65 million years ago, as we're all told, by some gigantic asteroid type of thing hitting the Earth and wiping them all out. But things like crocodiles and alligators are as old as the dinosaurs. How come they didn't get wiped out?
Nobody knows for sure. It's a thorny question, but we do know that some dinosaurs survived. I mean, have you ever eaten chicken?
When I was a meat eater, yes, I did. Yeah, and I know that they're related to them, aren't they? Yeah.
Then you're a man-eating dinosaur. Literally, you are a man-eating dinosaur. Because birds aren't just related to dinosaurs; they are dinosaurs. Everything we use to define what a dinosaur is, like pneumatic bones, the shape of the legs, everything are possessed by birds. Tyrannosaurus rex, the most formidable predator ever walked the face of the earth, has more in common with a budgerigar than it does with Triceratops.
So something obviously survived to produce chickens at the end of the day.
Yeah, there were feathered dinosaurs. Birds, if you like. Birds are not really a class at all. The class Aves is false. It's a subclass of the order Dinosauria. So birds are dinosaurs, and we know that there were completely feathered birds way back into the Jurassic period, not just at the Cretaceous at the end of the reign of the dinosaurs, but way back into the Jurassic. And a lot of dinosaurs like Deinonychus and Velociraptor were entirely feathered. The Jurassic Park films are staggeringly inaccurate. The things they call Velociraptor were actually Deinonychus, a related dinosaur. Velociraptor wasn't much bigger than a goose. The things in the Jurassic Park films are Deinonychus. But both Deinonychus and Velociraptor were entirely coated in feathers.
So really, the idea of the dinosaurs getting wiped out, that's not quite accurate then, you're suggesting?
No, some dinosaurs survived, and they are what today we call birds.
Interesting. Okay, and so the alligators and the crocodiles, maybe they're just holding their breath under the water whilst the...
Well, we know that freshwater ecosystems weren't as badly affected by whatever happened at the end of the Cretaceous period as saltwater systems. So things in freshwater, more of them survived than in saltwater. It wasn't just the dinosaurs that died out, it was a whole lot of other organisms as well, like ammonites, and a lot of things in the sea completely disappeared as well.
But the coelacanth, is it? The fish?
Coelacanth survived. The coelacanth, it was thought completely extinct until the 1930s, and they found them off South Africa and Madagascar. And recently, they found a different species living in Indonesia, in the seas off Indonesia.
No, my friend told me that they actually found one in the Thames in London. I don't know how true that is, but
no, they didn't find one in the Thames.
But the fish and chips were great.
Yeah, we did have a whale. We had a beaked, not a beaked whale, a bottle-nosed whale, which is a member of the beaked whale family, a few years ago swim up the Thames.
Now, and presumably they've been around for millions of years. Well, from the dinosaur age as well, have they? Or
no.
Okay.
Whales evolved much later.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we're actually drawing to a close now. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Andy, any last words before we shut up shop, as it were?
Yeah, it's been really fascinating. It's not only cryptozoology, but also kind of a biology lesson as well, and a kind of a dinosaur lesson all rolled into one. So, yeah, fascinating stuff.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard and Jackie. So it's Richard Freeman and Jackie Tonks there. And Richard or Jackie, either can answer this. Websites, obviously we ask people about their websites and where people can find out more about yourselves or the kind of subject you're talking about. Where can we find out about you?
Sure, yeah. The website for the Centre for Fortean Zoology is www.cfz.org.uk. And if you're interested, I've got a number of books that are available on Amazon. Orang Pendek, Sumatra's Forgotten Ape, which is about my various expeditions in search of a mystery ape in the jungles of Sumatra. Dragons More Than a Myth, which looks at dragon legends worldwide. Explore Dragons, which is another book by me on British dragon lore, and the Great Yokai Encyclopedia, which is an A to Z of Japanese monsters, strange ghosts and supernatural creatures from Japanese folklore, which are endlessly bizarre. Pigs that steal your genitals, giant man-eating sea cucumbers that grow out of girls' knickers if they're dropped into the sea, carnivorous giant rabbits that dig up bodies to eat their livers. God knows what's going on with the Japanese mind, but they've got the strangest folklore ever.
I've had Friday nights like that.
with pigs that eat your testicles, I'm sure David Cameron will be in touch.
Oh, we certainly will. We know what the Tories are like.
Yeah.
And the Bigfoot stuff, I haven't got a personal site. I mean, I'm on Facebook. I think there's only 3 Jackie Tonkses, so I will talk to people about Bigfoot if they join my site. But the really good sites, the websites, the BFRO, which is the website, the Finding Bigfoot people are from there, but the site is that's obviously a lot of entertainment in that. But the site is very serious. It documents sightings, exactly where they are, what time it is. The Olympic project's extremely good. They're trying to sort of find, they've done stats about what's the best time of year to see what's the best time, where's the best place to see them. That's really useful. There's Facebook Finding Bigfoot sites, quite good. There's a lot of, sites that, they're not very scientific, not very good, unfortunately, as well. There's also a good site. I'm involved with international site Primal People. That's a really good site. People who believe very much in habituation, because they're doing the habituation projects with Bigfoot, like they're doing mountain gorillas. They reckon they're going around chasing it with camo. It just thinks it's been hunted, so it's going to leg it. But people reckon they're doing some good habituation projects as well. So that's quite an interesting site. So there's a lot of good sites there.
Lovely stuff. Okay, well, thank you very much. It's been a very enjoyable 2 hours, Richard and Jackie. And hopefully listeners, if they want to follow up on that, follow the information given there by Richard and Jackie into the cryptozoology websites and things like that. And we'd love to have you back when you do come back from Russia, hopefully all intact, with hopefully some great pictures and stories to tell us. So Richard and Jackie, thank you very much for taking part in the Paranormal Peep Show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
pleasure.
Hopefully you'll catch some Yetis in Russia, maybe.
Yeah. Okay, and it's a good night from myself and good night from Andrew.
See you later.
Cheers.
Bye.